good about following the return to campus rules. And that has enabled us to have the exceptional test results since the beginning of the semester. We've only had 2 students test positive. They've fully recovered. We have no cases of COVID-19 on campus right now. And I am particularly proud of how our students have taken responsibility for their actions. I would also add that I think our seniors are playing a particularly powerful role. They remember what their friends went through last spring when we closed and we did not have all our protocols in place, nor did the nation or the world. And so they are really wanting to stay as part of this year and engage on campus as much as they possibly can, even if that's a change experience. I also think we have a great relationship with the state of Vermont and the town of Middlebury. We are in contact with the Vermont Department of Health almost on a daily basis. We are also in contact with the Governor's Restart Commission, who works very collaboratively with higher education. And I think that has made a real difference. We also have, as Colleen mentioned, an amazing leadership team that you're going to meet. They have done phenomenal work, and I couldn't be more grateful. Our faculty and staff have pivoted and adapted many times over the past 6 months to prepare for this unprecedented fall semester and ongoing development of the COVID crisis. Sujata Murthy, VP for Academic Affairs, will share insights into our faculty and how they've adjusted their teaching techniques and schedules to meet the needs of students here on campus and provide still a truly Middlebury education. And also how we are meeting the needs of those who can't be here because of health concerns or restrictions on travel. The other thing I think that has helped us up to this point is that students really wanted to come back and are really determined to do what's necessary to keep the college open. And I can say that from first-person experience. I'm teaching an in-person only course this fall. It's called Who Owns Religion? It's about controversies in the study of religion. And after my first class, and continually, even now, even in this mid-semester, when everything feels a little more routine, students continue to thank us all for bringing them back and sharing our learning community and creating learning community with them. And just again, for me personally, it's been heaven on earth to be back in class with these brilliant young people. I'm also delighted to see how students are taking advantage of the opportunities available to them to get experience outside of their classes and prepare for their future careers. I'll share some news with you. This past summer, we funded more than 275 internships. One example, our interns at the Sustainability Solutions Lab worked with the Nature Conservancy in China to conduct research on US national parks, which will be used in planning a new park in Baishanzhu. They also reviewed best management practices for shellfish aquaculture in North America to help make Chinese aquaculture more sustainable and environmentally friendly, which is such a wonderful thing to be able to do even in the midst of a crisis. And this fall, students at the lab are piloting what they're calling a sustainability consultancy. The goal of this program is to help student organizations and college departments advance the goals of our climate action plan, which you've heard about in the past, Energy 2028, and enhance overall sustainability. We are trying as much as we can to keep moving on all of our big strategic goals, one of which is, of course, Energy 2028. And related to that, of course, is that the ability to manage and address complex problems and find workable solutions is a hallmark of Middlebury and our students and our graduates and our families. Many of the most complex problems that are facing us today, climate change, disease, international conflict, systemic racism, and the global refugee crisis, just to take a few examples, do require solutions that transcend political and national boundaries. And we are global citizens and ethical citizens who cross intellectual, cultural, and geographical borders. That's our vision statement, literally. And we believe that understanding the world has never been more urgent. And I believe Middlebury to be the most globally engaged college in the country. I'm very proud of that fact, and that our combination of liberal arts and sciences, our schools abroad in 18 countries, 37 sites, the language schools and the Breadloaf School of English, and our Institute of International Studies in Monterey. All of these areas offer unparalleled opportunities for students, even now, even in COVID, to explore other countries and cultures and perspectives. We feel an educational obligation to remain global, even as the world is shutting its borders. And I think that's such an important piece of Middlebury's soul. I want to also touch briefly on one of the key challenges facing the United States and many other countries right now. We are turning a page. We certainly did this past summer in American culture in recognizing and addressing systemic racism. We recently reaffirmed Middlebury's commitment to anti-racist practices and to advancing anti-racist initiatives that are concrete and intentional and will allow us to transform our campuses. Through the action plan for anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we will engage the entire Middlebury community in fostering more access, equity, inclusion, and full participation in the life of our institution for students, staff, faculty, and alumni. And we're also focusing on departments and students' awareness, and our upcoming trustee meeting will be fully focused on questions of equity and inclusion. And we're very excited about that. Miguel Fernandez, our director of our Office for Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, will be talking about this in greater detail today. So with that, I will turn it over and introduce and begin a conversation with the members of our leadership panel and encourage you to post questions for us in the Q&A function below you on the screen. We're first going to hear from Mark Peluso, our Director of Health Services and College Physician and our Chief Medical Advisor. Then Sujata Murthy, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean of the College, followed by AJ Place, Associate Dean of Students for Residential Life, Barbara McCall, Associate Director for Health and Wellness Education, and Miguel Fernandez, who is our VP for Institutional Equity and Inclusion. And Colleen Fitzpatrick, VP for Advancement, will moderate the Q&A when we are finished with our panel. So Mark, I'm going to turn to you for the first conversation and question. I want to make sure Mark appears, so we get, there he is. Hi there. So I'm going to just jump in with one that I'm sure you've heard a lot and is one that we grapple with every day. Because you've been really amazing about creating the rules that we live by now, we have had success. So the questions now coming up in our regular ongoing life, well, why is Middlebury still being so vigilant when Vermont has such a low number of cases? And I'd love your thoughts on
that. That's a really good question, Lori. Thank you. I think the way to start answering that is to look at a college and its surrounding community as an isolated system, put it in a box, but it's a very complex system. We know from, I like to think of chaos theory when we're looking at complex systems, that any chaos theory would say that any small alteration in a complex system can have unintended consequences. And then I also think of the second law of thermodynamics. I go back to my physics, and that disorder will always increase. And so when I put those two things together, I think about our congregate living setting, which is complex, and that we need to do things to make sure that we maintain an orderly state. And so to do that, we have to remain vigilant. In real terms, it wouldn't take much for a case to get into a congregate living setting and to have multiple cases and more spread. We have mechanisms ready to go to contain that, just like we've had 2 student cases, and we even had an employee case, and that there were cases in our local community recently. And so we know it's around, the COVID's around here, and we do have the mechanisms to contain it. But I also think about the asymptomatic spread, and that we have a larger than one would imagine vulnerable population in our community. There are lots of students that come to college and with medical conditions, and they take immunocompromising medications, and they could be someone's neighbor and not even know it. And we have to be thoughtful that things could deteriorate not deteriorate, things could get chaotic rapidly, and we have to be thinking about the impact on our vulnerable population. So for those reasons, because things can deteriorate or evolve quickly, I think we have to maintain a high level of vigilance.
And Mark, many people credit you and Jen Kazmierzak with the success that we've had so far, whether it's been the testing center, our healthcare protocols and rules and so on. But and so that's great. I think sometimes when people think of folks in administrative roles, which you have been thrust into as a battlefield promotion, sort of sitting behind their desk making decisions all day. I know that that's not what you do, but I think it would be really helpful for people to hear you describe your day, like what you come across every day, since you are in the midst of this crisis like nobody else.
Yeah, that's a great one. Today, woke up and instantly clicked on the test results yesterday. And so oftentimes what I'm worried about or thinking about, what are the testing results? And so far they're all great, and we're still waiting for some to come in. We're still in that 24-hour window. And then it is typically meeting with, we usually start the day with emergency management team meetings. That's the team that looks at sort of operational issues and trying to troubleshoot some of those operational issues. And we start the day, and from there it's sort of subcommittee meetings, typically on Zoom, trying to look at and anticipate things that might be coming our way. So exiting students is really a hot topic right now, and getting students off campus safely when November 20th comes around. And then we sometimes even take a further view of how we're going to bring students back. And so it's a lot of Zoom meetings. I am doing less medical consultation than I normally do, but I am available certainly to the health center staff for that. If there are complicated or cases that they want to consult on. And yeah, that's generally the day. A lot of Zooms, a lot of email, and meetings. Yeah.
And running across the street to the testing center when we're doing our targeted dynamic test.
Yeah.
So, and I know your constituencies vary. You work with parents, you work with students, you work with the Vermont Department of Health, you convene the Vermont Department of Health's webinars every week. So all of that is all in a day's work. Quickly, before I move on, I would also love to hear, and I'm sure families would too, about your concerns about health and safety and how they affected the decision to hold J-term remotely and start classes on March 1st.
Yeah, thanks. I shared the concern raised. We talked about this at our weekly Department of Health meetings many times. It was on the agenda many times. How to bring students back, and every college is unique. Middlebury has a J-term, some schools don't. And then I think looking at really the entry and exit of students as being the most vulnerable period, not just for our community, but for the country, as there's a mass migration of people, and we know that movement can spread the illness. And so Middlebury, along with the other Vermont institutions and our NESCAC peers as well, because we meet with them frequently too, all share the concern that having multiple arrivals and exits would present a problem for our communities. And that could be for spring break. It could be for a J term and a Feb break. And so it seemed most prudent to just have one entry and exit for each semester. And that would be the safest and reduce the vulnerability.
And our governor is real clear that for the month of January, he doesn't want higher ed holding classes, which kind of makes it straightforward at a certain level.
Yeah, absolutely. The cold and flu season, the start of the spring semester will be different than the start of the fall semester. The weather will dictate that. And so cold and flu season's happening. We're bringing students from all over the country. Now they're moving in a cold and flu season situation. Even if it is, and I don't want to say just the flu, because the flu can be serious, but even the flu, we still have to work each and every one of those individuals up for COVID, which requires room quarantine and support. And that's important. If we can reduce overall illness on our campuses, that's a good strategy. The Restart team for the state is really concerned about the having cold and flu season impact COVID and housing. People will be indoors more because of the weather. And for those reasons, delaying a start into February for some schools, rather than having students come back in January, was recommended by our team of medical professionals that meet with the Restart Committee. For Middlebury, because we have a J term, it was a break to make that remote and just have students come back in for the spring semester.
That's great.
And I like to think it will create some opportunities for students to learn in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. And they will be coming back, of course, earlier mid-February to follow our protocols and so on. So, Mark, I'm sure people want to circle back with you, but now I'm going to turn to Sujata Murthy, who has been shepherding and cajoling and supporting and inspiring our faculty on any number of levels. And one of the things that I'd love to hear from Sujata is sort of daily life for faculty as they really try to keep students engaged in and out of a Zoom classroom. And so we'd love to hear from you a little bit about what faculty are doing to keep their students engaged. Those faculty who are teaching online, 50% of them are in hybrid or in person, 50% in line. Just related to that is, how do you see J term and spring term classes working? Any differences in terms of fall and spring? And a smaller question, but I think one that a lot of people ask, and that is, how are we managing classes that require lab work?
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Lori. I hope everybody can hear me fine. Welcome to Middlebury, even if it's online. And I think, Lori, this has been such an interesting semester. It's been challenging, but really interesting. None of my colleagues has phrased it as eloquently as you did, that being in the classroom is heaven on earth. But the message I've heard repeatedly, and one that I can echo from personal experience, is how excited and actually relieved faculty are to be back teaching. And so, as you know, Lori, faculty spent months over the summer planning their fall courses. They learned a whole new set of skills, especially the ones teaching online. They participate in workshops to figure out a range of new technologies, such as Panopto, Canvas, Padlet, Loop, and so on. They've also collaborated with colleagues from across the country to understand discipline-specific practices. So now, in terms of online teaching, we faculty have a new vocabulary and speak what in a pre-pandemic world would have seemed like an alien language. And one of the things that we have been negotiating is figuring out how to replicate the immersive classroom experience given our current health and safety regulations. And I think I can assert very confidently that our faculty have created a new set of teaching principles and practices. And I'm going to give you just a couple examples. So a colleague in chemistry has converted her lab courses in a way so that both remote students and those who are on campus can participate in the same experiments. Collaborating with a nationwide group of scientists who are practicing frugal science, she's now using Zoom to teach students how to use specific equipment and using the students who are in person in the lab to teach the right way to conduct certain experiments. So one of my students from Pakistan who's enrolled in another science course was super excited on Monday because he was mailed some equipment which allows him to understand the phenomenon of spectroscopy while he's taking classes in Karachi. So I think in terms of lab classes, we are sending students equipment, and this is true for the arts as well. And then in other kinds of, in the humanities and social sciences, faculty are using technologies, different technologies to create community within online classes. For instance, there is a technology called Kahoot that allows faculty to use the format of trivia games to assess learning and to do this in a fun way. Others are using a software such as Jamboard to replicate the experience of students working in groups on a blackboard or on a whiteboard. In short, what faculty are doing is creating new strategies to ensure that their classes remain engaging, inclusive, and accessible. They've tried to make the screen time feel different from the passive experience of watching something unravel on screen. And I think they've been really successful at that. Yeah, should I say something about the in-person experience, Laurie?
I think absolutely. And then just touch a little bit, you already mentioned the sort of lab experience and frugal science being a form of science that doesn't necessarily take all of the expense of the equipments in the lab, but tries to do it a little more sustainably, which I think is such a wonderful movement. So you spoke a little bit about that, but a little more on the what you see happening for J-term and the spring would be great for families to hear as well.
Sure. So I think I was surprised. In a real reversal, faculty have become really popular with students this semester. Students are craving one-on-one meeting time with faculty. And so what we have tried to do is modify some traditions. A signature feature of our first year seminars have been shared dinners and a number of informal meetings outside of the classroom. And we entered the semester thinking that this would be impossible at this semester. However, faculty have been working with the dining services director, Dan DeTora, to come up with a radical solution. So now that we're in phase 2, faculty and students are able to collect food from the dining halls, and then they meet students outside or within a space within the dining hall. So even faculty who are teaching their first year seminars as online courses are engaging in this practice, meeting students who are residing on campus and sharing meals with them. And the only difference between the past and now is that everybody has to maintain distancing protocols. The other major modification has been office hours. Previously, I remember sitting in office hours and twiddling my thumbs waiting for students to come to my office hours. Now, most faculty are pointing out how crowded their office hours are. Many of them are holding office hours outside in distanced Adirondack chairs. And faculty, even the ones who are teaching online, are coming into campus to meet with students and talk to them not just about courses, but just how they are experiencing living on campus. In terms of labs, I mentioned frugal science, and people are figuring out that the smartphone is the best device that we could have to help with those kinds of experiments. But faculty who are teaching on campus are also conducting in-person field trips. And so the woods around campus have become primary sites where faculty in biology are teaching students the effects of climate change on our forests. And so faculty are now taking smaller groups on these field trips. And this has turned out to be really effective for both faculty and students. They're getting the exercise and learning at the same time. Yeah. And along the same lines of innovation, I think for winter term, some of the things we're trying to do is we're going to have regular classes, the same as before, but we're deeply aware that 8 hours of Zoom maybe a little excessive. So we are trying to come up with these large thematic courses where we will have speakers come in and speak to students. We could have shared screenings of films, of performances, but then students will also get discussion groups where they'll meet in small cohorts and address issues like, let's say, climate refugees, contemporary urgent global concerns. So I think those are the things that will make J-term different.
Yeah, and I know we need to move on, but I also know that you're thinking with your faculty about what constitutes the immersive experience. You know, I think spring was, okay, can we just continue and keep our education moving and learning? Fall was, can we provide a Middlebury experience? And now we're doing what we do always at Middlebury, which is conscientious improvement, self-improvement, self-critique, self-improvement. So that active engagement on what constitutes the best immersive experience, I think will be crucial for both the fall and the spring.
Right, and I think I'll just give one quick example. Faculty are now retooling themselves to think about experiential learning strategies in their classroom. And one such example is going to be project-based learning. So faculty are incorporating project-based learning elements so that students can work collectively on projects and then present them to a larger public. So we are training students now, or at least the hope is that we will train students to become public intellectuals from their first semester on campus.
It's wonderful, and very much in the spirit of Middlebury and the kinds of things that we're trying to do with faculty as well. So, all right, thank you so much. And again, I'm sure people will circle back to you. I want to turn now to AJ Place, who is, there he is, hello. So there are lots of folks who I'm sure have already engaged you on this big question, which has kind of become a national question, right? Of what social life on campus is like now. What are the activities and programming in the college? How much can you do given all the limitations that we're dealing with? What are student organizations doing? How are they offering to build community and engage students? And how are students themselves finding ways to connect, to exercise, to stay healthy? So just dive in and tell us those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you today. And President Patton, thank you again. AJ Place, I serve as the Associate Dean for Residential Life and currently as the Interim Dean of Students also. In my work, working with students is absolutely one of the best parts of my job. And in talking with them, I will tell you that they are so grateful to be on campus currently. It's all we've heard from them over the past 5 weeks for the most part, is gratitude. Being together after so many weeks apart has really been truly amazing for them. And I think they're feeling very grateful for that. Of course, there's some unique challenges of this term, given the restrictions from the state around keeping 6 feet apart, and that can absolutely make it hard for some students. And I also want to name, before I jump into some of the activities, that this is traditionally a very challenging time for new students as they are getting acclimated to campus. The newness and excitement of orientation and the start of classes has worn off. It's not as shiny anymore. Students are turning in their first big test, midterms, etc., experiencing those for the first time, and really trying to figure out who they are, who they want to be at Middlebury, and with whom they want to spend their time. And so I think I just wanted to preface some of this to acknowledge that some new students may be struggling, and that's really normal, even given, very normal, even in a non-COVID time. And so in thinking about social life and what I've seen on campus these past 5 weeks, I wanted to describe a little bit about what it looks like. And I'll start by talking kind of about a typical evening. We've had really amazing fall weather, which has been a great blessing. And if you were to wander around campus on a weekend night, as I have done a number of times over the past 5 weeks, you will see students everywhere, sitting in small groups outside under tents, using the Adirondack chairs, playing ping pong and other games in residence hall lounges. That is a really big one. I've seen a lot of students doing that regularly. Out exploring the Knoll, which is our organic garden on campus, spending time together, really connecting in small groups. It's been amazing to have students back. They've brought incredible vibrancy and energy to campus that we hadn't really seen since early spring. There's also a lot of formal programming going on. So the Middlebury College Activities Board, known as MCAB, has sponsored events such as virtual escape rooms, trivia nights, etc. The student activities team and student organizations offered Dunless Day, which is a play on Lake Dunmore, last weekend, which offered food trucks and lawn games, sand art, a student DJ, and we saw lots of students joining and coming to that throughout that event. There's also been canoe trips and sailing and hiking. For some upcoming events, just so folks know what's on the agenda coming up, there's outdoor movie nights each night on the weekend. There's 2 movies being offered tonight exactly. 2 movies being offered tonight specifically. Regular tea times, there's a yard sale event this weekend. There's an Among Us virtual game event happening, sunrise hike. And one of my favorites, which I think is really exciting, is we're even bringing some puppies to campus for students that are looking to have some snuggle time with animals, which I think is often actually really popular. The dining team has been bringing food trucks and ice cream trucks, and we know that students get very excited about food options, so they've been really loving those. Our residential life teams have been hosting game nights and snack nights, spa nights, minute to win it contests, bonfires, and and they've also been working on connecting students across first year buildings. For the Battelle and Allen students that are living in those buildings, they offered a program to connect them across those 2 buildings. We had 70 students sign up in just the first day alone. So students are clearly craving these opportunities, and we have a long list of events that are also being scheduled for the next 5 weeks. In terms of exercise, they're running, they're walking, they're hiking the TAM. The fitness center is open now. The spin club is offering 3 free classes a day. And I know the dance clubs have all held their auditions and are working on performances. And so it's been really great to see that happening.
Yeah, and I know both in arts and athletics, obviously curtailed in a major way. Student athletes are able to do socially distanced workouts and that's it, right? And same for the arts, they're only able to work at a socially distanced way with a lot of curtailment. And yet there's a kind of creativity in that space as well. And it sounds like students have been creative. We also know that student life hasn't been perfect, on any campus. And you are, in the hot seat in that space. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how you're holding students accountable in your office and what that's been like. I'm sure it's been tough, and it's an unusual season around student behavior and those questions. So tell us a little bit about your experience of the last month.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're exactly right that it's a tough part of the job. And I will say that, for the most part, students are doing really well. They are keeping distance. They are wearing their face coverings. And by large, we have them to thank for really keeping us moving through this term in safe ways. So they've been doing really well. And I want to highlight that. Since the beginning of our planning for students to return, we've really emphasized the fact that we are in an all in this together moment. And I think COVID has also shown all of us the importance of community health, looking out for one another, et cetera. And so since students arrived on campus, we've been speaking to them about being in this all together time and the responsibility to engage respectfully with one another when concerns come up. We've given them social scripts in our training programs to help them help each other to meet these critical health expectations. We've had staff members that have volunteered to be present on weekend nights, walking around campus, talking and walking in our communities off campus where off-campus students live. We've heard from students specifically how great it has been for them to see those staff members and be able to connect with them. And that's not always sufficient, as we know. So we've had to put into place a specific COVID disciplinary system and process, and it has as its primary goal the mitigation of potential risk that may be introduced into the community. And our response is proportionate to the level of potential risk a particular behavior might introduce. It's also consistent with the Governor of Vermont's guidelines for reopening of colleges. The governor specifically called for us to be swift and decisive in our actions. And so in responding to behaviors, including removing students from campus if they violate our health pledge in ways that introduce a significant potential for risk. As I mentioned, our responses are proportionate to the potential level of risk introduced into the community. So what this looks like is that a report comes into the Office of Community Standards, which is staffed by members of our team. They investigate an alleged behavior, and if they find a student responsible, they look at the sanctioning matrix that we designed to focus on risk mitigation and a possible potential level of risk when they assign a sanction quickly. You can find that matrix on our website, it's available. And there's an appeals process for serious sanctions that currently comes to me as the appellate authority. And again, we're charged specifically by the governor to do these rapidly so we can maintain health and safety for everybody. And of course, we want to maintain and be mindful of fundamental fairness of our process. That is always a value we hold, and also respond to the specific charge from the governor. And that's what we've been doing.
And you're really in the hot seat, both in terms of creating all the creative, fun, amazing moments of connection, as well as these harder times. Well, I think, again, I'm sure folks will come back for some questions and conversations with you, AJ, but it's very much a related topic, which is health education on our campus. And I'm going to turn now to Barbara McCall for some further conversation around this question, that all the issues and scenarios that AJ just described for us. We've got this national narrative. You've heard me opine about it, right? And the way that students are being represented, in our national narrative is that college behavior is less than positive. That's real. In many ways, that's true. But there's also this whole other narrative about the success. We've seen one or two stories about that, but we have so many stories to tell. We convened a group of health education. It was called the Health Education, COVID Task Force, to really focus on education first around questions of health. And you are one of the major designers of that, the leader of that. So how would you say our health education approach has allowed us to be successful? How has it contributed to our success overall?
Great, thank you, President Patton. There are a number of approaches that Middlebury has used, I think, to be successful during this pandemic when it comes to student buy-in, public health messaging, and education. And I think the three that come to mind in hearing you describe this is really the use of our student leaders as credible messengers, our commitment to regular surveying, and then our ongoing comprehensive health education plan. So we know that students turn to each other first, whether we like it or not, as colleagues and staff and as parents, perhaps, with questions, concerns, and to regulate their own behavior. And what we did was capitalize on the strong peer-to-peer relationships that our returning students had with each other this fall, and provided extra staff support and training to our student leaders and peer educators who arrived in that first wave of students who came to campus in August. We shared with them sort of a behind-the-scenes look at how and why we were using educational strategies to address COVID-19 in our community, and we invited them to be our prevention and accountability partners, like AJ described. We gave them skills and support to step into those roles as our partners. It's not just enough to invite them or tell them they are our partners. We knew that we needed to give them time, staff supervision, and concrete skills and tools to use. From the very beginning, we've emphasized that this time presents challenges we're facing together as a community, as many others have said. And we truly believe that empowering students to be part of the solution instead of just assuming that they are at the heart of the problem has been key to our success and our efficacy on campus so far. We've also regularly asked students about the challenges they are facing. We want to be relevant and realistic in what we are asking of them and in the tools and the content that we are providing. AJ mentioned those social scripts. We want to make sure that we are speaking to students in a way that they can hear and in a way that they can then use with each other. So we've asked them routinely, what information skills and tools do they need to be safe and successful at Middlebury? And how prepared and confident do they feel to engage in the behaviors that we're asking of them to protect their individual and our community health? Each time we survey students, we've been using that feedback to influence the next wave of educational materials so that we really are meeting our goals of being both relevant and realistic and student informed. Those waves of education themselves are sort of the last strategy that I wanted to share to keep and maintain open lines of communication and willing engagement with our students. We know that sharing an idea or an expectation or a skill only one time doesn't help any of us learn a new way of being or adapt to changes in community. So we need to use multiple channels, multiple mediums to communicate with our students regularly. And that's helped us create multiple doses of vital education on platforms that students go to and look to for credible information, and that meet the needs of all of the diverse kinds of learners in our community. Engaging students as our partners, this regular evaluation and refinement, and then our multi-dose multimedia campaigns, I think have really been the foundation of our successful health education approach to not only support behavior change as we have all adapted to new ways of being, but also to really keep our mind and our eye on increasing and maintaining community health and safety, which is our ultimate goal this semester and for the rest of the year.
So Barbara, what I really am struck by is this idea of this question, right? How confident and prepared do you feel for this health expectation, this health behavior? And framing the question that way, it means students are like, actually, I need more preparation. Bingo, you know what you need to do as a health educator. Or no, I don't feel confident. Bingo, you know that part of what you need to do is build that confidence by providing tools and practices and so forth. So I think that's such a great way to frame the question, especially for our students for whom those questions are always big questions, right? As you're forming a self between 18 and 22, but even more so now as you're forming a COVID self. Who knew that would be, part of our challenge? I know that mental health particularly has come up a lot for folks, concerned families, isolation, questions of connection. We heard a lot from AJ on what students are doing to make that difference. Those food trucks are everywhere. I have a lot of walking meetings, socially distanced walking meetings, and I ran into one without my wallet, but they gave me a wonderful sandwich anyway. So I was happy about that, but they are very popular. So I'm seeing, some of the exercise walks and regimes, but the mental health question is real. I'm loving it. If you could talk a little bit about how we're addressing that and what are we doing?
Absolutely. So I think you've hit the nail on the head here that we, of course, are thinking about student health holistically and absolutely thinking about student health beyond COVID-19 testing and physical health services that are in response to COVID-19. So it's important, I think, for parents and families to know that all of our student health focused offices are up and running this year to support that holistic health. And that we've launched some new resources and really created new ways to access resources that I think are really helping students get what they need from us at this time. So in August, we launched Mid-Telehealth, which provides 24/7 access to on-demand medical and mental health care, as well as scheduled medical care, mental health care, and health coaching. This is brand new. And Mid-Telehealth is available to all of our enrolled students. For those studying outside the US right now, where clinician licenses are restricted, they still maintain that ever important access to the 24/7 mental health component of Mid-Telehealth. And that's on demand. It's called Talk Now, and it is exactly like what it sounds. Students can download the app or visit it from a desktop, click on Talk Now, and they'll be connected to a licensed clinician to talk about whatever is on their mind. If it's a crisis situation, the clinician will handle it with them. And if it's not, if it's just a, I'm lonely, I'm homesick, I'm confused, I'm feeling overwhelmed today, students can call and talk to someone right away to talk about those kinds of things. Mental health has also increased our access to thousands of clinicians across the country so that no matter where a student is or what time of day it is, they can get the care, mental health or medical, that they need and have those records added back to their electronic health record here on campus where we consider their healthcare home. Mid-Telehealth has increased our access to clinicians with specialties and interests that build and expand on those campus-based staff that we have here and given students more autonomy and choice when it comes to selecting a clinician that reflects their identity perhaps, or looking to discuss a specific concern. It's important to know that 39% of the mental health and medical professionals through Mid-Telehealth identify as providers of color, and that Mid-Telehealth will be available to students 24/7, 365. So during our break after the November 20th campus departure, J-term, spring term for the rest of the year, and ongoing beyond that. In addition, go ahead, Lori.
I just was going to make sure folks knew that our counseling center is also open and going full tilt with all their regular meetings and so on.
We are, yes, perfect. Thank you for that lead in. So in addition to the capacity Mid-Telehealth is giving us, we've also made significant changes to our campus-based staff clinical services. Students are increasingly using our online health portal to complete forms, schedule appointments, get their needs met, and are meeting with clinicians via Zoom. And college counseling has a brand new service model this fall that provides same-day appointments for any student who would like to work with a staff counselor, completely eliminating wait lists, which has been huge. We know that wait lists are something that many college campuses are facing when it comes to mental health services. That's not something that we are having to manage right now, which is fantastic. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that we've embedded mental health resources and skill-based trainings in groups out into the community, which means that we're taking information that used to exist only behind clinical walls and bringing it to students where they live, learn, and study in informal and in even peer-led educational settings. So this includes the launch of our mental health peer educators who are running small group programs called Project Connect, which are focused on increasing mental health protective factors like connection, resilience, relationship and communication skills. And again, we're leveraging the power of peers to work with each other to have positive connections and build quality relationships, which we know insulate against those negative mental health outcomes. So we're looking at promoting mental health instead of only just responding to it. The programming efforts out in the community also include counseling groups and workshops where students can come together who are managing similar challenges, seeking similar skills, or have shared experiences under the facilitation and the supervision of a staff counselor. So we're thinking about mental health holistically and contextually within COVID-19 and thinking about all of the different ways that we can both respond to it when students are in crisis or struggling, but also promote it so that students have those protective factors when they need them as we all continue to manage a challenging time.
I think that's great. And, you know, part of what I so appreciate about this time, as challenging as it is isolation, and feelings of isolation are part of a student's experience in so many ways as they go through college in a regular time. And the fact that we're being as aggressive as we are and thinking about ways to mitigate that and enhance a sense of belonging is so important. And my guess is that we'll take a lot of those skills into whenever we move back into a life that looked like pre-March 2020. So appreciate that. And a reminder that, you know, promoting effective relationships is one of our frameworks for our strategic plan. We see it as a strategic move to continue to try to build those skills for the 21st century. So thank you for that. And it's really that sense of belonging and effective relationships that inspires our new action plan, which I will turn to Miguel to speak about a little bit. Miguel, you know, part of what we know for our BIPOC students, for particularly the page turning experience we had in America this summer with all of the different folks really working together to fight racism. We know that that sense of belonging is so important. We just had a meeting with students with over 180 students, I believe, attending to speak with us about these questions of equity and inclusion. And, you know, we have a very interesting campus. We have a amazing heritage of inclusivity for its time. And yet we've been challenged by being in one of the most white states in the country. When class is in session, we are one of the most diverse with Burlington places in Vermont. And that brings exhilaration, it brings excellence, it brings a sense of the vision of what America and what higher education can be. And it also brings deep challenges. And I know the action plan is designed to push us to the next level. And I'd love to hear you describe it a little. And I know you described it so beautifully for students last night.
Thank you, Lori, and hello, everyone. Yes, so we've been involved putting together this action plan on diversity, equity, and inclusion over the past couple of years. We started out with a climate assessment. We brought in outside consultants. We've done a number of studies in the past on our own, but we brought out some outside consultants because we wanted to get a different perspective so that we weren't repeating what we've done in the past. And you know, I think if you continue to study yourself, you have certain blind spots, and unless you get a different perspective, you won't see the whole picture in a sense. And we built off of the results of that. That group came in and interviewed people in small groups and larger groups through surveys, studied our materials, and then provided a significant report. We didn't base the action plan simply on that report, however. We looked at many others. We wanted to get as many voices as possible into what the Middlebury experience is like, what the climate is like on campus, what the issues are, what the barriers are to an equitable education. And we comb through all of that information. We produced a draft. We shared it with a lot of stakeholders on campus, among them faculty, staff, and students, different committees, different departments, different student organizations. And we got really good feedback from a lot of them. The plan ended up focusing on 5 different areas. One is focused on faculty and staff, and we look at our work in recruitment and hiring. How are we diversifying our faculty and staff? How can we do better? The onboarding, how we bring them on board, around development trainings that we do in anti-racism and to address bias and these kinds of things, and very importantly, issues of mentoring and retention. The second section of the plan is around students. Again, recruitment and our financial aid approaches, development, again, how students are exposed to how to engage in challenging conversations, et cetera, and how we are supporting our students. We dedicated a whole section to fostering and restoring community, and how do we prevent, acknowledge, and respond to harm when it occurs. In the climate assessment, we discovered that there was a great deal of concerns around issues of accessibility, not just about the built environment, which we have our challenges in Vermont in a very hilly campus with very old buildings, but also in the classroom and in all kinds of different areas of accessibility around learning disabilities, challenges of this sort, and what we can do to improve in that area. And finally, the last section is about transparency and accountability, how we communicate, how we report on our diversity, share our data, and also around assessment and planning, accountability, and these types of issues. So that's kind of the plan in a nutshell. And we also have a timeline as to how we want to roll this out moving forward over the next 5 years. Of course, this work is never done. We don't look at this as a finished product. Rather, we're trying to look at it as a live document. We expect people to make recommendations. We will tweak a lot of the strategies that are in there. We will also expect to see new strategies. Just this week, we had a number of proposals from students that we are now considering and have acted on a couple of them already. And I expect that we will incorporate more. I expect to see initiatives from the faculty and from other parts of campus as well. So.
Yep, that sounds, it's been inspiring for me to work with you on these issues. And one of the things that I will say is that accelerated dialogue, I think, is one of the keys for us in terms of, feedback in real time, really engaging with students and their concerns. I'm wondering, do you think that Middlebury's different around questions of inclusivity in this semester, both because of the summer and what happened in the United States over the summer and because of COVID? Just talk a little bit about how you experience the student energy now in relationship to constructive ways forward on these really tough issues.
Yeah, I do think we're in a different place this semester. I think this summer, as we saw the events pan out and the reaction across the United States, to be perfectly honest, the activism that came out, a new sense of awareness of issues for a lot of people. For a lot of people, there was nothing new. They've been dealing with these issues for a lifetime. But for others, sort of kind of a revelation in some ways. And a great deal of activism across the country. So we sort of expected that to come onto campus. And I will say that the big difference this semester has been an expectation on our part to be engaging actively on issues, and an expectation to be heard, and for us to solicit opinions, feedback from the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities specifically, and to work very hard on what the barriers are for them, and to work on a more equitable education and campus environment, in particular for those communities. And that feels different.
That does. I would agree with you completely. Again, so much more to follow up on, but I know we want time for Q&A from our wonderful families. And so I am going to thank all of our panelists for engaging up to this point. And then what I'd like to do now is turn it back to Colleen Fitzpatrick, who will be posing some of the questions that we found in our Q&A box.
Thank you, Lori. So many questions in our Q&A box, and I am afraid we won't get to all of them. I've been trying to group them so we can go through them fairly efficiently. And the first area of concern that is expressed in multiple ways has to do with whether or not there will be more in-person classes in the spring semester. I think this might be a question for Sujata. So there are variations on this. For instance, will you guarantee that at least one of the classes for every student will be in person? Will there be more in-person labs? Will first-year students have a chance to have at least one in-person class? Multiple folks indicated their first-year students did not. So that is an overriding concern for many parents. Sujata?
Thanks, Colleen. I think faculty are grappling with this. I am grappling with this question. And one of the things we are definitely planning on doing is having more in-person components to classes. One of the big constraints we have are the space constraints. We have the health regulation that mandates that there has to be a 6-foot distance, which has limited our classroom capacity tremendously. And then the other thing that has also happened is even when we do have in-person classes, we have had to put in new HVAC systems, which have made it hard for people to listen carefully. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to think of other ways for faculty to interact with students in person, perhaps not the entire class being online, and then making sure that at least once a week, faculty meet with students.
And also just to add, when we have this classification that is both helpful and not helpful called hybrid, and what hybrid means could be anything from a mostly in-person class with one, discussion section every month or something online or week, just something that's mostly online with one in-person. So I think Sujata is exactly right. We're sort of breaking down that hybrid category to make sure that what constitutes, when we say hybrid as a bureaucratic classification, that what we really want is as many in-person components as possible to that hybrid.
Thank you. Another set of questions did have to do with health and safety and testing. So I'm going to ask Mark. There are some parents who are still asking why the decision not to come back for J-term. So that's question number one. And then we have a couple of questions about whether we'll increase testing when we're in the winter months, and whether students will be tested before they are sent home to be sure that they're COVID-free. So that's 3 questions in a row to Mark.
I love those questions. Thank you, Colleen. I'm going to tackle the last one first. Testing for students to go home. We are ready to go if every student needs a test in order to go home. Currently, if we have the prevalence rates, the low COVID rates that we have, we're not anticipating doing that our health commissioner actually advised against that. And the students will be coming from an area where there just wouldn't have been an infection. However, if rates rise, we have teed up a testing clinic to test all students that week. It is ready to go if we need to use it. There are some students that will have some testing requirements, either international students, or I think there's some states that actually want to test for students to come back. We're looking at the names of those, and it changes so frequently. We'll have it ready at the time as we get closer to the end of November. We will test those students if they need to, and we would do a normal testing level of testing that week anyway, so there'll be lots of testing slots if students need them. I know that some families will be worried about is it safe for the student to come home and be around more vulnerable family members. If they're coming from our campus, if we have the prevalence, if we send everyone home today for Thanksgiving break, they would be in a really good place. Even if someone did have a negative test on a Monday or Tuesday and left on a Friday, the risk still exists to expose them to vulnerable people, whether they have the test or not. And so prevention measures should always prevail. In terms of testing, I'm sorry, Colleen, the first two questions. Give me the bullets
again. The very
again.
first question had to do with clarifying once again, why not J-term? Why no J-term?
Right. That's actually the Restart Committee and the governor and the governor's office basically saying no one back before the 1st of February. The science behind that has to do with reducing the numbers of entries and exits off of college campuses, because that is the most vulnerable period for schools. That's where the cases can spike, and we're trying to reduce that risk. And then the middle question, Colleen, had to do with, will we be doing more testing in the spring semester? We're not anticipating
as
that.
We're in the coldest months when we bring this.
Right.
Yeah.
We're not anticipating that. We have the ability to ramp up testing or ramp down testing depending on prevalence rates. We anticipate doing more symptomatic testing, which we don't do at our testing center. We do it at the health center. So if a student is having symptoms, they come to the health center to keep them out of the asymptomatic population at the testing center. We're ready to do that. But if we did start seeing more cases, we would certainly increase our weekly testing, and we are prepared to do that.
Thank you, Mark. We had a flurry of questions as Barbara was speaking about mental health, and so I'm going to pose a couple of these to you. There is mentioned that counseling sessions are only 25 minutes, and whether...
Oh, Colleen, you've muted.
Colleen, you're muted.
Whether that 25-minute period is long enough. There was also a question about the limits on first-year students and the number of friends that they can bring into their space, and the fact that that's really stressful. And is there an answer to help them with that situation?
Great, absolutely. I can take the first part of that, and then maybe I'll ask AJ to help me with the second question. So yes, part of the new model at counseling to increase immediate access has been to reduce the length of session times. And so they are 25 minutes. And what that means is that a student who calls can get a same-day appointment. It also means that at that time, the student can say, can I schedule to come back tomorrow? The answer will be yes. Can I schedule to come back next week? The answer will also be yes. And so the student also has the option at the end of that session to take a look at a menu of options. So we're sort of moving away from a traditional, every student should be seen for a 50-minute session once a week in an ongoing way, to ask the student, what do you think you might need? If a student would like to have a longer 50-minute session, they can absolutely get on the schedule for that. If they'd like to try a group and talk to other students who are feeling challenged by social interactions or who are also first-year students, they can go that route. If they aren't finding somebody in our counseling staff on campus that they're having a fit with, They can look on telehealth and see if there's a provider that better reflects their identity or has a specialty that they're interested in. So what we're really trying to do is put the options or the menu in students' hands to say, you know what's going on for you. Here's a menu. Let's work together to figure out what the next step might be in the next day, the next week, for the rest of this semester or the rest of this year. So yes, appointment times have shortened, and that's what folks are getting when they call to make an appointment, but it doesn't mean that they can't make more appointments or that they can't request a longer session. All of those are options for students.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That's super helpful.
Oh, great.
Do you want AJ to take the other question about the limit on the number of friends? And then I have several other social life questions for you, AJ.
Yes, let's send those to AJ.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just to say, it's certainly no limit on the number of friends a student can have. There is a limit on the number of students they can have in their space. And that's because we need to keep in mind the 6 foot of space, the preventative measure that is really, that Mark, I'm sure, will nod to, that is really critical in keeping our community safe. And so, you know, as you can imagine, residence hall rooms are pretty standard across the country, and ours, you know, a lot of them fall into that. And so keeping 6 foot of space in between people can be challenging in those smaller spaces. But each residence hall, especially in the first year areas, have lounges that they can go and hang out in inside. There's lots of outdoor spaces. The Adirondack chairs are still out. And we've been slowly reevaluating those and expanding them. So just this week, we went up from +1, the number of students in a room, beds +1, to +2. And so slowly turning that spigot as we move through our phases. So we'll continue to evaluate those, but really we need to, again, think about the preventative measures of keeping space. And just to add on, you know, students can have 4 close contacts. And so that's something for them to keep in mind too, as they think about their little circle of friendship on who's a close contact versus who do we still need to keep space with.
Great. Well, you mentioned Adirondack chairs. And so we have a question about whether Middlebury might consider more fire pits as it gets colder, keeping the Adirondack chairs on campus, and having folks have more opportunities for the informal social hangout space that you just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that that's in the docket to continue to work on. They are very popular every year, and especially this year. And so I know that they are going to be out longer than they have in the past to make sure that students have that access. And we're working on fire pits. That's also a question with the town that we will be navigating as fire pits and burn permits in the town are regulated. So that's something that we are definitely working on. And I know that students are a big fan on. And there's also, just to name it, some indoor fireplaces that students have access to in a number of their lounges in their residence halls. And that's something that can be put into place as well and that they can use.
Thank you. A couple of questions that are arts related for you, and I don't know if you're the right person, AJ. One regarding the prohibition apparently on singing, that there aren't opportunities for students to sing. And can you address that? And then dancing, that students can get together for dancing in groups of 10, and the comparison was to athletics, where teams can be bigger than that. And if they're outside and masked, why a limit on the dancing? I don't know if you're the right person for those questions.
I'm happy to try. President Patton, did you have something there? It looked like you were jumping in.
No, I was just going to add something about that. I've tasked a team, to AJ's earlier point. I'm informally, very informally calling it Project Copenhagen, which is to make the way people live outdoors in Copenhagen in the winter. They get blankets when they sit outside. There are lights everywhere. There are so we won't be able to have the full winter carnival effect this year. So how can we create a kind of winter wonderland part of our campus as we live in the winter months, or mostly it's going to be March, but and a part of November. So the team has already been charged and they're working hard on it. So Sujata, you might also be able to check in, and Mark, with the dance versus athletics question. Yeah?
Mark, why don't you go first and then I will follow up.
Sure. On the singing note, there are some guidelines. It's through the National Federation of High Schools. Actually, there's a fly right on my head. National Federation of High Schools on singing, and combining that guidance with the reports coming from the CDC on outbreaks that have occurred with groups singing together have raised some concerns. And Jeff Buettner, the chair of the music department, has done a great job, put together a really great safety plan to address those concerns. And we spoke with Jeff, I want to say maybe 2 weeks ago, it could have been last week. And there really just isn't really an update to enable that to be done safely. That's because of the projection, the exhalation, and typically the static nature of people singing. That's different than people being outdoors running around because they're moving. There's more airflow with the movement, and there just haven't been as many outbreaks or report of outbreaks, but there have been reports of outbreaks associated with singing groups, which remains a concern. We continue to look at it. Jeff Buettner, Professor Buettner, has done just a really great job putting together that safety plan. But as far as wind instruments go, it's the same concept. There are still concerns about wind instruments aerosolizing vapor and spreading COVID in those environments, even with covers over the wind instruments. We know it's a challenge, and it actually goes into the theater department too. I talked to the Draper. I spoke with him last Friday night, talking about how can we get his voice classes moving forward without having to use masks, and the amount of distancing that's required. It has to be outdoors. It creates some challenges. So we continue to look at those issues very closely. I've really been impressed with the faculty's ability to address those. In terms of dance groups, comparing them to athletic teams, I think the 10-person capacity is really for any group that doesn't have an ongoing supervision component. So the athletic teams are highly regulated. And I know sometimes students walk by a field and see athletes running all over the place, but those drills are highly orchestrated to maintain at least 6 people. And the groups may be a little bit larger, but they really, really are regulated, and a coach has to be present. They're designed specifically. The dancing, while we might let students gather in larger groups and do more, that would violate our gathering size, and could lead to more, if a student did have an infection, could lead to more students being exposed, and then it multiplies as they get into the congregate living setting. So for right now, we're going to maintain that strategy, but I just want to tell the parents, we're always talking about this stuff and looking for ways to make it easier and better for our students.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that. I realize that we are already over time, but there were several questions having to do with when students are leaving and arriving, and in particular, some questions about international students. So the first question, I'm going to go to the first question, which is, are there any groups of students who will be allowed to return prior to February 24th, 25th? And then on the questions of international students, would it be possible for some to stay through exams was one question. The other is, what will we do with international students and other students who are not able to go home for all or at least part of the very long break that we have for? So the multiple questions about coming and going. And maybe that's AJ.
Yeah, I can certainly, the freshest one in my memory now, Colleen, is that last one. And so for students that have a need to stay over break, they should be in touch with their dean. There's going to be a petition process to stay over break if they need to. And so they should definitely, there's going to be information, information coming out about that shortly. So students will get emailed about that, but they should definitely be in touch with their dean. Can you repeat the other ones?
So one of the others was international students. Would it be possible for them to stay through exams on campus rather than going home with the rest of the students? That was a very specific question.
Yep, good question. And Mark, I think you were also part of this planning on the schedule of ending up right before the Thanksgiving break.
Yeah, I think that would be possible. The deans really will have a sense of what is possible for each individual student. Because the break is so long, and because I think it's going to be fairly isolating here, over a break, unlike a typical winter break, I think we're trying to encourage students to strongly consider going home. If an international student, if it's a challenge to get their academic work done, on during that last week because of travel considerations or internet access or other issues, the deans are certainly equipped to answer those questions and work with those students.
Great. And then finally, any students who will be able to return prior to February 24th, 25th, are there categories of those students?
Yeah, my understanding is that we're planning right now for students that need to do in-person research to return and be able to return for the J term. And so there'll be a small group of students that will be able to work with their faculty, I think, and I'll look at Sujata for that. But I believe for that in-person research, there's going to be a small group that returns for them.
Right, and I think it's going to be starting February 1 to stick with the mandate, the state regulation.
So there are multiple other questions that we haven't had a chance to get to. As I mentioned at the beginning, what we will do is have those questions inform the frequently asked questions posted online on the Fall Family Weekend. I apologize that we can't get to every single question in this format, but it's been fabulous to see the real strong interest that parents have in understanding deeply our decision-making process and ensuring the goodwill and the good health of our students. Lori, did you want to close with some comments?
I just want to say a couple things. First of all, if there ever was a moment that reaffirms my commitment to what I call collective genius, which is, really creative solutions that communities come up with, it's this moment, and it's because of your work with us that we've been able to be as successful as we've been. And also to say that small colleges in general, and particularly small rural colleges, are really showing that this can be done. And I think that has to do with the kind of creativity, connection, and control that is possible in the kind of educational environment that Middlebury offers. And so interestingly, this time has really underscored the strengths of this educational model in the United States, and families like you are a part of that incredibly powerful educational model. So I want to thank you for that as well.
That concludes our event today. I want to thank everybody, as Lori said, for participating. And please do go to the Fall Family website, Fall Family Weekend website, see all of the other wonderful things that are happening, and hope to see you online, if not on campus at some point within our lifetime. Thanks very much.